on a cold January morning in 1992 in a rural area outside Madison, Indiana. Two hunters made a discovery that would haunt a community forever. In a field, they found the burned remains of a young girl. She was only 12 years old. Her name was Shanda Sharer, and the story of what happened to her reveals something deeply disturbing about the darkness that can exist within teenage minds. But this isn't just a story about violence. It's about obsession, jealousy, and how a toxic relationship spiraled into one of the most brutal crimes in Indiana's history. Shanda Sharer was a seventh grader, described by those who knew her as bubbly, friendly, and full of life. She loved music, had a bright smile, and was navigating the complicated world of middle school like any other 12-year-old. But Shanda had recently become involved in something that would seal her fatal brief romantic relationship with a girl named Amanda Heverin. Amanda was 14, and she had recently broken up with her girlfriend, 16-year-old Melinda Loveless. And Melinda was not handling the breakup well. Not well at all. Melinda Loveless came from a troubled home. She had experienced abuse and instability throughout her childhood, and those experiences had left deep scars. By her teenage years, Melinda had developed an intense, possessive attachment to Amanda. When Amanda started seeing Shanda, Melinda's jealousy transformed into an all-consuming obsession. She couldn't let it go. She talked constantly about Shanda, about how much she hated her, about how Shanda had stolen Amanda from her. To Melinda, Shanda wasn't just a rival, she was the source of all her pain, the obstacle standing between her and the relationship she desperately wanted back. And then she decided to do something about it. On the night of January 10th, 1992. Melinda enlisted 3 other girls to help her: Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Toni Lawrence. Lori, 17 years old, was perhaps the most disturbing of the group. She had a fascination with death, the occult, and violence. She collected knives, read about serial killers, and seemed to relish the dark thoughts that most people would push away. The 4 girls devised a plan. They would lure Shanda out of her house in the middle of the night, supposedly to meet Amanda. It was a cruel trick, exploiting a 12-year-old's feelings for someone she cared about. Around midnight, they arrived at Shanda's house. Hope knocked on the door and told Shanda that Amanda wanted to see her. Shanda, trusting and eager, got into the car. She had no idea she was climbing into a vehicle with her killer. What happened over the next several hours is almost incomprehensible in its cruelty. Instead of taking Shanda to see Amanda, they drove her to a remote location. There, Melinda and Lori attacked her. They beat her, tortured her, and subjected her to unimaginable suffering. When they thought she was dead, they placed her body in the trunk of the car. But Shanda wasn't dead. She was still alive, still conscious, still trapped in that trunk, as the 4 girls drove around, stopping at gas stations, even going to get breakfast at McDonald's. They were laughing, acting as if nothing was wrong, while a dying child lay in their trunk. Eventually, they drove to a remote field. They poured gasoline on Shanda and set her on fire. Only then, after hours of torture, did Shanda Sharer's suffering finally end. The psychological factors at play in this case are complex and deeply disturbing. Melinda's obsession with Amanda had warped into something monstrous. Her inability to process rejection, combined with her traumatic past, created a volatile mix of rage and desperation. But what about the others? Laurie Tackett seemed to have found an outlet for violent fantasies she'd harbored for years. Hope and Tony, the younger accomplices, later claimed they were afraid that they felt trapped once things began. But they still participated. They still drove around with Shanda in the trunk. They still watched as she was killed. The 4 girls were arrested quickly. Toni Lawrence, consumed by guilt, confessed to her mother, who immediately called the police. The evidence was overwhelming, and all 4 were charged with murder. The legal proceedings revealed the full horror of what had happened that night. Melinda Loveless and Laurie Tackett were sentenced to 60 years in prison. Hope Rippey received a 50-year sentence, and Toni Lawrence, who cooperated with prosecutors, received a 20-year sentence. But no sentence could undo what had been done. Shanda's parents, Steve and Jackie, were left to grapple with the unthinkable loss of their daughter in such a horrific way. The community of Madison, Indiana, was left asking how 4 teenage girls could commit such evil. Over the years, some of the perpetrators have been released. Toni Lawrence was released in 2000 after serving 9 years. Hope Rippey was released in 2006. Laurie Tackett was released in 2018, and Melinda Loveless was released in 2019. Their releases sparked outrage and pain for Shanda's family, who felt that no amount of time could ever be enough for what these women had done. The Shanda Sharer case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How does teenage jealousy transform into murderous rage? What role does group psychology play when multiple people participate in an atrocity? And perhaps most disturbingly, what were the warning signs that were missed? Shanda Sharer should have grown up, graduated high school, maybe gone to college, fallen in love, had a career, a family. She should have had a life. Instead, her story ended at 12 years old in a field in Indiana, at the hands of people who should have been her peers, not her killers. Her memory lives on through her family, who have worked to keep her story alive, and through the community that still remembers the bright, smiling girl whose life was stolen far too soon. This is the story of Shanda Sharer, reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers in the dark. Sometimes it comes from people who look just like us, who walk among us, and who, for reasons we may never fully understand, choose violence over humanity.